So integrated pest management is a common sense approach to managing pests and diseases.
We grow a large number of crops here on the farm, and we have varying different pests and diseases, many new ones that have been discovered all the time. But
are trying to reduce our level of chemical use, both for us and our customers, and so it makes sense. And if we overuse chemicals, we lose access to those chemicals because of resistance. So integrating other management strategies is just better all round.
So people have a view that integrated pest management can be more expensive or more time consuming. The answer is it doesn't have to be at all.
Integrated Pest and Disease Management, or IPDM, is an approach to tackling pests and diseases in plants that combines biological, chemical and cultural strategies. Ultimately, it benefits a farm by reducing the need for pesticides and herbicides. In turn, this has wider, long-term benefits for soil health and the local ecosystem, leading to healthier and more resilient crops. It can also reduce production costs in the long run.
It's been around since the 60s and 70s, and it started when people realised that the newer pesticides with the synthetics such as DDT, first of all, they were ineffective because of resistance. Second, they were harmful to human health. And third, they were toxic to the environment.
The aim is to use strategies, lots of different strategies, that minimise the use of pesticides and trying to catch pest and disease problems as early as possible.
The idea is that you actually take control and that you are the one who are managing your property. There are some key issues you need to consider in its implementation. The first one of these is it doesn't mean no use of pesticides. The second is that monitoring your crop is the most important thing you can do.
IPDM is harder to do than just going and spraying chemicals on a roster, but it helps you get to learn your crop better, and in doing that you actually can manage your crop better overall.
Integrated pest and disease management borrows from nature. In natural ecosystems, things are in balance. Plants, animals and microorganisms work together, nutrients circulate and the system stabilises. In agriculture, this system is disrupted, leading to more opportunities for pests and diseases.
We're talking about looking at all sorts of options here, and we're looking at that in a systemic way, looking at it as a whole ecosystem. I'm using this example where if we look at, first of all, this back area where we've got the trees, which we might refer to as the natural ecosystem. Okay, so what are the characteristics there? Well, first of all, they have very low levels of input. Okay, you've just got all the natural inputs that are occurring. But you also have in there a very high level of biodiversity. And that means that you've got all of these interactions occurring. People tend to think of what's happening above the ground, but you've got all of this biological activity happening below ground as well. So we're talking about soil health, we're talking about root health, and we're talking about all of those aspects as well as what's happening above ground. And that's all to do with the biodiversity. That makes it a very, very stable ecosystem, which means you can come back 6 months, a year, 10 years, 20 years, and basically it's the same thing. So if we then move to this section here, which we might refer to as being the productive area, obviously the first thing is you're doing a lot more inputs. Okay? You're deliberately reducing the biodiversity. And in that process, you're making these interactions that you had in that natural ecosystem far fewer. And that makes it much less stable. I guess if we move from, there's a field situation, but it becomes on steroids when you move into protected cropping. You know, because you've got ideal conditions not only for your crop, but you've now got ideal conditions for pests and diseases. So you've actually got to kind of manage this whole thing all the time and keep making inputs. Now, nothing wrong with that, because obviously you're getting all the outputs from it. But this is what we mean in terms of integrated pest management. We're trying to take the best of what happens in natural ecosystems and see how we can incorporate them into your productive system.
The first thing to do really is to understand the crop and the sorts of problems that you might encounter. So, as you know, there's lots of different things that cause diseases in crops, lots of different pests that might be a problem. They can occur in different environments, so if you're indoor, outdoor, the climate, the area that you're in, whether you're in close to everyone else who's growing crops or whether you're out on your own, can influence what sort of things that you'll see. So from that, once you've done that homework, you can start looking at how you'd monitor the crop and what problems that start to occur and try and catch them early. I guess what happens with diseases is that they can look very similar. The symptoms can look very similar to one another and sometimes to some other nutrient problems or whatever. So getting that diagnosis is pretty important. Once you know the cause, then you can actually work out from understanding the biology of the pathogen how to manage it effectively.
Monitoring your crop is the most important thing you can do. Monitoring for pests and diseases on a regular basis is going to give you the confidence in being able to determine out of all of the strategies that are available to you, which ones you can implement and at which particular stage.
Monitoring for pests and diseases involves systematically inspecting the plants for symptoms or damage. Monitoring for pests can also be done by using sticky traps that attract insects. Monitoring can also involve keeping an eye on weather patterns and climate predictions and using historical modelling to prepare for future events. It's important to record your observations and use this data to assess how well your management strategies are working. This can also help to predict when pest and disease pressures may be building, allowing for early intervention.
You need to devote some time to it. You know, while you're out there doing things like watering or putting plants out in the field, planting, harvesting, you can be monitoring as well.
The more you know your own situation and your own crops, the more you know which are the ones that are going to be more susceptible. Make sure everybody is actually involved, not just a particular person.
Good cultural practices in IPDM help to prevent or suppress pests and diseases. Things like maintaining good hygiene, installing barriers for pests, and removing weedy plants that attract them. Planting disease-resistant cultivars is another way to boost your crop's defences. More holistically, ensuring good soil health through crop rotation, adding organic matter, not overplanting, and keeping nutrient and irrigation levels optimal can also guard against pests and diseases.
When I talk about diseases, we know that diseases are important, but sometimes they're interacting with the nutrition of the plant. So if the plant is malnourished, it is more susceptible to diseases. In terms of hygiene and sanitation, obviously they're all the usual things that you should know about in terms of making sure the potting material that you're bringing in, the actual reusing pots and are cleaned and sanitised. You have cleaner areas where you're doing the work and you're not actually recontaminating some of those materials and areas. For most cut flower growers, if you're not propagating your own material, you're probably bringing in seedlings from other places, and it's probably a good idea to have those kept separately and look at them and monitor them to make sure they're not contaminated with problems already.
Biological control uses predatory insects or beneficial microbes to tackle an infection or infestation. These insects or biological sprays can be purchased commercially and introduced to a crop, or the insects might exist there naturally.
Another very important strategy is biological control. And for a start, there's a whole range of natural biocontrol agents out there anyway. And it's a question of how do you actually encourage them and certainly looking at any way in which you can put various resources in place, and these might be flowers, so anything which produces nectar and pollen is supporting beneficial species. We can also look at the opportunity of actually buying in biologicals, and this is one thing which has really picked up probably in about the last maybe 10 years or so. Most of these come with some sort of a sawdusty or type material in them, of vermiculite, something like that. This is then spread out over the crop. Now, you don't have to spread it out over the entire crop, because if your monitoring is saying, okay, here's an area, this is like a hot spot area where we're actually starting to see these things building up, then you put more around there, and particularly around the circle of that area where they are.
Some biologicals are broad spectrum, affecting the whole system. Others act on a particular part of the system, such as the soil. Each pest and disease requires a species-specific approach.
There's a whole range of microbial biocontrols for diseases as well. It's a little bit trickier because their mechanisms of activity are far more different. We like to think of them more in terms of how some of the pesticides that you use or fungicides that you use might work. Some of them actually are parasites of the pathogens. They produce antibiotics and various enzymes and things that we call surfactants, which are like detergents that actually can kill off a lot of the plant pathogens. Many of them actually are able to grow around the root system in the rhizosphere, that little zone around the roots, and so they can be competitors for food and space as the roots leak out various nutrients. Those guys can live and compete much better than a lot of the pathogens.
IPDM does not exclude the use of chemical pesticides. Instead, the chemicals play a supporting role as part of a broader strategy. This includes both organic and synthetic pesticides.
What we will find is that people who've relied on pesticides feel as though that is the only way to manage their pests and diseases. I hear some people say, yes, you use all the other strategies, and then if they're not working, then come in and use a pesticide. I don't believe that's the appropriate way to go. Pesticides can be used sometimes earlier as a strategy, but it becomes a strategic use. It's a minimal use of pesticide, and it's a selective use of pesticide. So rather than necessarily saying, let's wait till we have a bushfire and then we're going to come in with the pesticide and basically spray it out as you would in the same way with a fire truck, that's not the way I believe that pesticides are going to be most effectively used as part of an IPM program.
So, some best practice tips for using pesticides with IPDM. Firstly, biological control will not work on large infestations. In these cases, spraying is necessary to bring the pest under control before introducing other strategies. Secondly, when pest or disease pressures are building quickly, spot spraying with softer chemicals can help to prevent the issue spiralling out of control. What is important when using pesticides is avoiding broad spectrum, residual, and systemic products as much as possible. These can have unintended consequences on your wider integrated management plan, particularly on your beneficials. And finally, when you do have to spray, it's important to rotate modes of action where you can. This prevents resistance developing and keeps the chemistries effective for when you really need them. While IPDM might seem like it requires significant investment in terms of time and energy, it is beneficial in the long run.
If you simply rely on, say, use of pesticides, then when that goes haywire, and it will go haywire, you're actually going to be probably spending more money and spending more time and spending more sleepless nights than you would implementing integrated pest management. So the main message I'd like people to take away from today is that you can start very simply with implementing integrated pest management. It doesn't have to be a full-on, it can be a slowly gradual developmental stage.